how can a loved one or family member help someone with mental health issues? Do you have tips, especially for people that can't really afford, let's say, group therapy, but you're dealing with this, you are living with a person that is suffering from a mental health illness, and you want to know how best to help them? What tips can you give to that person?
If you could mobilize a group of people, what movement would you mobilize and why?
I would call my movement the mindful movement. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death between people aged 15 and 29. 1 in 3 people are expected to suffer from mental illnesses in their lifetime. So I believe that mobilizing people to strive for mental health would actually fix so many social ills in our society, and that is what I would mobilize.
I'm just going to ask the question again, if you don't mind.
No, cool.
So the question that I had was, we know that, so sorry about that. So we know that mental health doesn't only affect the person that is dealing with the mental illness, but it can also affect the people surrounding them, and especially people that are trying to help. But I think you find that someone is suffering from a mental illness and you don't know how to support them, but you still want to be there for them. But you often neglect yourself in the name of help. But I want to highlight, or want you guys to highlight, how it also affects the people surrounding them and how it affects them. So that question goes out to both of you.
Look, we very often refer to something as like caregiver burnout. We have like family members dealing with somebody suffering with a mental illness. They're absolutely exhausted. They can't cope. The patient level of unpredictability is having a toll on them. That all their attention is focused on that individual, and then other family members are suffering as a result. I mean, there's a lot of resentment toward the person that's sick. And so we talk about obviously your own self-care and where it's possible to put some kind of non-negotiables in place in terms of looking after yourself. Because if you are pouring from an empty cup, then you certainly cannot support the individual effectively. That's so where it's possible for you to have your own sort of counselling or your own safe space, that's important. It's also important as a family to be educated around the individual behaviour, because very often families will, out of sheer frustration or anger at what's actually presenting, they'll say, well, the individual's doing it to themselves. They're doing it on purpose, or they're being manipulative. So they need to be educated, and they also need to be educated that the individual is not choosing to be mentally ill, and certain things are within the individual's capabilities in terms of keeping themselves well, and other things may. So you as a family have to be educated on warning signs, so that when the wheels are starting to come off, you can put the necessary measures in place to support yourselves and to support the individual.
Yeah. I think I want to agree there. When somebody is diagnosed with a mental illness, they feel like the entire life has been turned upside down. But actually, the entire family's life has been turned upside down. And I echo what has just been said, that the most important thing, you need to educate yourself about the illness, the diagnosis. And the more educated, I think knowledge is power. The more educated you are, the more you are able to help your loved one, and also not neglecting yourself, not neglecting your needs. What I've seen with family members, as soon as somebody has been diagnosed, the entire world also now, the illness becomes the primary focus, either in the family or in a relationship. It becomes the primary focus, and sometimes as a caregiver, you might neglect or forget to exist out of that situation. So it's very, very important to sort of try and be able to step back sometimes and step out of the situation and breathe. And so that you can be able to offer the support that is required. But if you are also exhausted, if you are misinformed, sometimes you don't know why your family member is, like Liani is saying, you don't know why they behave in a specific manner. Educate yourself about the kind of, like I did it personally. Educate yourself about the medication that they're taking. Know what the side effects of those medications are, so that you can understand when your loved one is behaving in a certain manner. And one important thing is having that open communication. It's not easy to achieve, I must say, in the beginning, but it's a process, it's a journey. Take it as in it's a journey that you are going on with your family members, but it can feel very overwhelming. It can feel like a spinner in either a relationship or a family context. So self-care is very important. There's that saying that you have to put the mask on yourself first before you can be able to assist the person next to you.
And I love how both of you spoke on how you can't pour from an empty cup. I think most of the time when we're trying to help, we forget ourselves. But when we forget ourselves, you're not really helping anyone, because you're going to get to a point where you're burnt out, which is going to come to my next question. But also something that you both said that's quite important is education is key. I think when you're not educated, and that's the problem that we have in our society, and that's why these sessions are quite important, is that we are not educated on the mental illnesses that exist, so it actually feeds into the stigma around what is happening. But when you're educated, you can give the person the necessary support without overextending yourself or actually taking out of yourself in order to help them. So that was a very important point for me. But one thing that you were speaking about, Temi, is about getting to a point where you might even burn out. So I wanted to find out, what is caregiver burnout, and how do family members and loved ones make sure that they look after their own mental health? So in as much as we're talking about how to support a loved one, I feel like the people that are supporting them are equally as important. So how do we avoid that, and what is caregiver burnout for someone that is watching and has been doing this for a very long time, taking care of other people? Like, what is it, and how do we avoid it, and how do we best support ourselves before we can support other people?
So Shudu, I can share maybe some of the signs of caregiver burnout, like something that I said, where you no longer exist out of your loved one's illness. You're constantly very tired. There's something that they call compassion fatigue. You're like really exhausted all the time. You're no longer sleeping well. You start also getting sometimes physically unwell. That is why it's so important to sometimes even you need to take that time to look after yourself. And immediately when you're no longer sleeping properly, those are the signs. You start getting irritable. You start thinking about those thoughts that you're so tired, and then you feel like your loved one is now doing it, they're acting out, or they're doing it on purpose, or you're no longer there, like mentally, because you're so tired. So, it's very important to look after yourself, look out for the signs when you are feeling tired, and I think also ask for help. It's very important. We have organizations like SADC that are really there to assist, and sometimes in our communities, we're very scared to go out to you find that it's something that the immediate family is going through. You can't even ask for help when you need to. If you're caring for somebody, you're scared because you haven't had the conversation yet with the other family members. So I think it's very, the more we create awareness in our communities, the better. And as a caregiver, I just want you to know that you are not alone. You don't have to go through it alone. It's okay to say I'm tired. It's okay to say I need help.
Yeah.
I think that the other thing to add to that, I mean, in everything you've said it's so spot on and so true, is that mental illness is not like having, let's say, the flu. Where your nose is running, or your throat is sore, your eyes are watering, and people can actually physically that you are ill. And so very often it's very hard for family members to take you seriously or to actually believe what you're presenting with. So the individual who's struggling with major depression and who can't get out of bed in the morning and doesn't want to go to work and is neglecting their personal hygiene and is withdrawing from things that used to be pleasurable, it's often believed they'll say, well, they're just being lazy. They need to pull up their socks and then. And you can understand, from a family member's perspective, how frustrating the situation must be and how angry they must be because this previously lively individual who was the life of the party, who provided so much financially and emotionally for the family, is suddenly completely unavailable. And so, again, it's important that you have support, that you have a space where you can vent these feelings, where it's safe to express this, and at the same time you're also supported and educated in terms of what you are dealing with and in terms of how best to support the individual, because they're not doing it on purpose, and I promise you they wouldn't choose to spend day after day in bed away from the world if it was up to them.
And what tips would you give them in order to for the family members that are supporting a loved one with mental illness? What tips would you give them to take care of themselves? Like, we're going to get to the tips that they can use to help support a loved one, but what tips can you give them to take care of themselves? I know we say don't pour from an empty cup, but then it's easier said than done. For example, if it's your child, how do you tell a parent to not pour from an empty cup? How do you, because it can be tough, like it can honestly be tough. So what do you say to that person? What tips can you give them to the point where, yes, it could be your father or it could be your daughter, but what tips do you give to that person who's saying, I feel selfish if I'm not taking care of my daughter who's suffering from a mental illness, because there's also that guilt that comes with it as well, where we feel like we need to overextend ourselves. And I've from what I've read or even noticed is that especially when it's someone that's super close to you, you tend to blame yourself for how they may feel. So how do you help that person? What tips do you give to that person where you're trying to detach? Honestly, like, detaching is sometimes important, to try to detach from the situation. Yes, take care of that person, but not forgetting yourself.
And I think that the self-blame and bring up, I think, is incredibly destructive, because what happens is you overcompensating and sort of put more and more and more to try and deal with your own guilt. And so I think that did it perfectly. You need to ask for help and support from other family members, friends, community members. Very often with someone with mental health, there's a huge fear that they're a risk to themselves or even a risk to others. And so you become the nursing team. You are watching that person 24/7. And that in itself can deplete you completely. And so if the person's on suicide watch, for example, enlist the help of other people. Write a battle plan in terms of what they need to do. Give yourself to go out, go and have a walk, go and do something that's sort of more kind of normal, whether it's having a cup of coffee or meeting someone to just vent. Make sure that you yourself are getting enough sleep. We know that sleep deprivation and depression are very, very much linked. And very often, compassion fatigue and caregiver burnout and depression, they begin to mirror each other. And so you don't know where one actually starts and the other one begins. Enlist the help of community members, whether it's from doing your grocery shopping to making meals, so that you can both focus on yourself and your child or a parent that may be suffering. And also, if you yourself, if you start to actually see that your mood is dropping, that you can't concentrate, that you are that you're forgetful, that you are super anxious every time your phone rings because you don't know what news you're going to be presented with about that individual, seek help. Whether you go and see a GP, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counselor, a social worker, get support for yourself. And it's not about that both of you can't afford that you can't afford to forget about yourself in this process.
Yeah, I actually take it like from a practical level, have a self-care routine, have like every day at 5 o'clock, I go for a walk. Whether if you like meditation, don't skip those things, because sometimes you skip it one day, second day, the next thing you back to the spiral of getting burnt out and being tired. So for me, in my support group, we speak a lot about self-care, and we speak a lot about routine. Have your self-care routine. In the morning, this is what I do. And I always speak about in the 24 hours that you're looking after your loved one, or 24 hours a day, give yourself 30 minutes for Shudu. Let the 30 minutes, if you can afford it, if it's an hour, if you can afford it, give yourself an hour. It belongs to you. It's for you to do with that time where you really like taking care of yourself. You can divide it however you want to say. 10 minutes, I'm gonna go running, I'm gonna read my favorite book, or I'm gonna journal, or I'm gonna do whatever that, or put on a face mask if you are a lady, or whatever it is. But give yourself that 1 hour. And if you are living with somebody with like constantly 24 hours, I think like what Liane is saying, when you reach out to family members out there or the community, I think sometimes it's okay to take one day off, or if you can afford somewhere where you're outside that that environment, where it's either maybe you, if you can afford, go on a hike or do something that is literally, it's a recharge. You're gonna come back a bit energized and ready to face whatever is to come. So have a routine, make it as practical as right, because it's difficult, like you say, it's easier said than done. But immediately when you put it on paper and say, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna wake up, start one day at a time, one step at a time, you will get there. But have your self-care routine, it's very important.
Yeah, it's about focusing on the small victories, even for yourself. Even if it's taking a walk for 30 minutes, even if it's just going out, even if it's just cooking your favorite meal for yourself, just doing something for yourself is important, because it's going to feel like a victory. Now, to go back to how to best support a loved one with a mental illness, how can a loved one or family member help someone with mental health issues? Do you have tips, especially for people that can't really afford, let's say, group therapy, but you're dealing with this, you are living with a person that is suffering from a mental health illness, and you want to know how best to help them? What tips can you give to that person?
So it's vitally important, again, that you make the person feel like you are part of their team. You're not against them. You're there to support them. You are there to offer, what they need in terms of whether it's to take them to appointments, whether it's to be aware of their warning signs, whether it's to make sure that they are sticking to their routine when the wheels start falling off. So they're getting up, they're having a bath, they're eating their meals a day. Also, that you ask permission to join appointments, to ask those courageous questions about what's going on, what can you expect, what kind of treatment are they on, how would you know if the individual is not being treatment compliant, and then also set up some kind of contract with the individual that says when they are in a space where they do not have the ability to make decisions, what kind of decisions can you and can't you make on their behalf? And sometimes those decisions require hospitalization. And if the individual is not in a place where they can make those decisions, or for example, they're presenting as a risk to themselves or even others, very often the individual has to be made an involuntary patient, and that is very often a heartbreaking process for a family, because that they are inflicting harm on the individual, but simultaneously they know that if they don't intervene on that level, that the individual themselves could be like at huge risk.
Okay.
And the worst thing for a family is to lose someone to mental health difficulties, because they are left with the questions around, why didn't I do more? What more could I could I have done? You know, am I to blame for what's actually happened?
Yeah, and to add on what Liani, I think from personal experience, I like what you say, to say if you can, do join your loved one when they go and see the psychiatrist or the doctor. I mean, they are so willing to educate, to give you information. It sometimes sort of assists the loved one as well, because sometimes they even forget about how they react to medication, how they behave, and things like that. I found that to be very, very helpful to do that. So I really want to encourage people to do that. It really works wonders, because like you are part of their team with as a family members, with the doctors and everyone, and you're all working towards assisting your loved one.
But something that Leanne spoke about earlier was you touched a bit on consent. Because we're talking about someone getting involved in the treatment plan and everything else. But for example, how do you get involved in the treatment plan of the person, of a loved one? But what if there's the other side way? What if that person is not willing to get help? How do you get consent from that person who doesn't want to wake up in the morning, who just wants to stay in bed, and even when they go to their psychologist or psychiatrist, they're just trying to keep to themselves, because it may sometimes feel like a lonely journey. You feel like you have to deal with it yourself, it's your problem, and then someone's saying, I want to be involved. How do you get consent for that, and how do you get involved without seeming as if you're just being nosy, or you're trying to just find out, or just trying to impose on them, because at the same time you don't want to feel as if there's something wrong with you. I feel like that's the biggest thing. You don't want to feel like there's something wrong. Now there's someone constantly checking in on you, someone trying to find out, what are you doing at the doctor's, what are you doing? Because most people try to walk the journey alone. So how do you get involved, especially when someone is not trying to have any of that? But even if they are, how do you ask for consent in such a way that does not make them feel like, okay, this person is just trying to crack my style? Yeah.
So look, if the has decision-making capacity, if they are of mind, and it is their choice to go this journey alone, no other practitioner can engage with you unless they have the individual's consent, because that would be going against the Mental Health Care Act and completely unconstitutional.
Absolutely.
However, if you see that the individual functioning is deteriorating on a daily basis, so like the person you spoke of, who's not getting out of bed, who's not leaving the house, who's withdrawn, is it possible to get a social worker involved, for example, who may be able to do a home visit and engage with the individual in a very non-threatening manner, so you yourself are not even in the room? But again, the person has to agree to that. It's very, very hard, and it's very frustrating. And sometimes we advise the family members, let the person know that you are there for them when they are ready.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes it's your need to be involved. It's your need to fix the situation because you are feeling understandably helpless. But it's not necessarily what the patient needs. And so very often, by simply making the space for the person without bombarding them, they may realize that they actually need your help and your intervention.
Okay.
Obviously, again, it's all based on an assessment of the individual's capacity, and sometimes you may need a doctor to make that assessment.
And I'm glad you spoke, because someone was even saying that sometimes you find people constantly messaging you, trying, like, they make you feel like there's something wrong with you, So I'm glad that we touched on this, because you also just want to feel like you're actually making progress. But then once you tell someone that I'm struggling with 1, 2, 3, or someone, I don't know, you spoke about suicide watch earlier, you find that even when all of that has passed, I've seen or even heard how they'll still constantly check in on you and make you feel like you're not making any progress. So I'm just glad that you touched on consent, because in as much as a person can be suffering from a mental illness, it doesn't mean that they are completely incapable of making decisions for themselves, but in some cases someone has to intervene. So I'm glad we touched on that. And I just wanted to ask Tembi, there's still a lot of stigma in different communities and cultures about mental health, right? So what do you do if the stigma or the misunderstanding is within your own family? So now you're trying to get help from a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but then your family's saying no, it's probably something else, because especially in Black communities, you find that they're always associated to something else, such as black magic or something cultural, and you are now seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist that's telling you that, no, friend, you are struggling with a mental illness. So what do you do with the misunderstanding? You're not getting support from your family because they believe that, no, this westernized version of the help that you're trying to get is actually very separate from the help that you actually need. You just need to see someone who's not a psychologist or psychiatrist. So how do we break the stigma in order for people to get the help that they need, or even the support that they need, so they don't feel like they're alone?
That's a very tough one, especially in our communities, right? It's I mean, I have a lived experience where I had a family member who I only found out at a very later stage that they had a mental illness, and they just sort of seemed like an outcast, misunderstood. And only later, when I started studying psychology, I realized, I mean, I was a child, but I started putting two and two together and realized, actually, this is what has been happening, and we have to educate our families. It's not easy, especially with the older generation, and especially if a family has specific beliefs. Even now it does happen. We'll pray for you and the illness will go away, or we'll take you to this place and it will go away. I think if you are in that a situation, it's more of targeting individual people and sitting with them and talking with them. There's no straight through answer that would solve that stigma within the family. But I think if with every opportunity, what I do personally, I do take a chance. If I see a loophole where this is an educational moment at their level, using the type of language that they speak, it also helps, because if you come there with your psychology and your bombastic words, it also doesn't work. So you always I'm sorry, you have to sort of try and engage them at their level and just constantly do it. Don't give up. With my family, it has changed. There's more understanding. There's more awareness, because I am like that person who would say, Ma, come, let's sit down and talk about this. I think this is what is happening. And my mom is, I have parents that are quite old, but to sit with them and explain them this, I've realized that sometimes we try and do it with a bottom-down approach, but with a top-down approach, try a bottom-up approach at their level, the way they understand it. It's not easy, but it is attainable. It is achievable. It's the language that we use, how we communicate with our loved ones. And if you are diagnosed with a mental illness, I think also sometimes, like, you are an individual who's willing who can make their own decision. I think you need to also do that for yourself, because I've seen that sometimes people don't want to go get treatment, or they rather not go and get treatment because of the stigma that is within the family. Not my child. What is my sister gonna say? I have this child now that so it's that's why I'm so passionate about any work that involves educating our community, creating awareness. So there's I don't have a straightforward answer for you, but one individual at a time, one family, every opportunity that we get, we need to create awareness. We need to educate our families and our community. From a practical perspective, I've seen individuals who would invite the family member to the support group. And the first meeting, you can see that they thinking, what is happening? This is not for me. A person can be quiet for the entire session. It's okay. But sometimes someone within the support group will say something that will bring about that light bulb moment in your family member, and you see them coming again. So you can invite them to a support group. If there's seminars, invite them, and on the radio, wherever you know that there's gonna be a topic about mental illness, just invite them. I think the stigma is all about, in our community, is most of the time, what will people say?
And
sorry.
I was saying that you touched on something very important earlier. Actually, you touched on so many great points. The fact that we need to explain things in terms that they understand. Because we come with these big bombastic words to people that have been raised in a different way that we have. We are very lucky to have access to information. We are very lucky to have education that caters, and most of the time that also caters to educate us on mental health and mental illnesses. I mean, I was educated about mental illness on social media, but then you find that you're saying the older generation does not have access to that. So even when you're trying to explain, I think also kindness towards, let's say you've been diagnosed as a person that is suffering from a mental illness, and you're trying to explain it to your family, also the kindness to know that they may not understand what you're saying, but if you break it down for them properly, they may have better understanding, which goes back to what both of you guys were saying about education, and what you also saying about one conversation at a time. Because something I find that even with my own family, before, they never understood anything about mental health. But then the more we speak about it, the more we open about it, the more conversations we have, you find that my mother now is giving other family members advice on mental health, but then she never used to understand any of it. But because we took the time to have the conversations where if she doesn't understand what this mental illness is, you explain it properly to her, not what she will read on the internet, because sometimes the internet can just blow things out of proportion. But if you can even get your psychologist or your psychiatrist or even like a support group leader who understands mental illnesses to try and explain it in a way that they can understand, especially in different cultures and different spiritual groups, you might find that there's more understanding that exists because we're having those conversations. But sometimes I feel like as people we have, if they don't understand once because you didn't explain it properly, oh no, they don't understand me. But if we also have the responsibility to take the time out to have these conversations and educate one another. But I don't think we have enough of that, which is quite important to look at both sides, the person who's supporting you, but also the person that's suffering from a mental illness. They need to meet each other halfway sometimes, which also goes back to being involved in the treatment plan, because if you are involved in the treatment plan, then you can understand what the person is going through. So I think the biggest thing that I'm taking out of this is education is quite important, but also being kind to one another. So when you are explaining that, Mom, I've been diagnosed with 1, 2, 3, this is what it means, because when they read, for example, someone was talking about how someone can say, oh, you're so bipolar, oh, you're so this. That's because there is no understanding of what that is. But let's say you've been diagnosed with something like that, then you can explain it a bit further and say, listen, it's not what people think. You don't just switch from one mood to another. No, it's more intricate than that. Knowing that mental illnesses, they don't just occur. They sometimes can even be a chemical imbalance or something that you inherited. But there's a lot of misunderstandings, and it all starts with one conversation at a time. So I'm very glad that you touched on that, because a lot of people have been asking about it, especially from the Black communities. How do you tell someone that is telling you that let's just pray it away, or someone that's telling you that no, it's witchcraft? How do you explain it to them in a way that they'll understand? But then it all starts with one conversation at a time. And then my next question comes to Leanne. How can families or loved ones help identify symptoms of relapse, or what can they look out for if someone is not doing well and needs help? Because I think sometimes we don't really realize when someone has relapsed. So what can you look out for?
Okay. I think it's important to also note that there are as many mental illnesses in this world as there are people. So the way that depression, or for example a personality disorder, will manifest in one person is going to be completely different in how it manifests in another person. You spoke about kind of this Western framework of diagnosis, and I completely agree with you. Whilst we may have this manual in terms of tick, 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 it doesn't always work that way. And symptoms are not always going to go according to a textbook. So you need to consider yourself as an expert on your family member. You know, referred to as their baseline level of functioning, meaning what was their functioning like before they had an episode. So were they able to get up and go to work? Were they able to meaningfully engage in relationships with family and friends? Did they have activities that they engaged in that they really enjoyed? If you're looking at a child or an adolescent, has there been a change in academic performance? Have they withdrawn? Are they wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer to feel self-harm, for example? If you notice any change in behavior or mood in a family member, be it subtle or grossly overt, don't be afraid to ask those crucial questions. I've noticed a change in you. I've noticed that you're a little bit withdrawn. I'm concerned about you. Is there anything you want to discuss with me? Or just know that I'm here for you. Okay, that's the first thing. So have the conversation. Okay, out for signs around kind of a change in their hygiene. Look out for signs of, are they sleeping too much or sleeping too little? Are their thought processes racing all the time? The way they're thinking, their speech? Are they engaging in things perhaps that they weren't doing before? For example, sleeping the entire day and being awake the entire night. Are they disappearing for long periods of time? Are things going missing? Is the individual suddenly sorting out their affairs, which or giving prized possessions away, for example? So there are many things that you can look out for. But at the end of the day, make yourself an expert on that individual, so that you know when they. Then, together with that individual, sit down with them and draw up a battle plan of what they need you to do when the wheels start falling. So, do you need to fill the fridge? Do you need to make sure that they've got clean underwear? Do you need to book appointments for them? Do you need to inform, for example, that they're not doing well, and who is it okay to speak with, and what can you share and what you share?
I'm glad you touched on a bit of how you can speak to them, because that was going to be my next question, because how we say things is also quite important. So approaching things from a place of kindness and just not being judgmental is quite important as well, from what I'm gathering. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. So I loved how you gave examples as to how to even approach a situation like that, because sometimes you can approach it from a place of aggressiveness. Like you're saying, it's not, no one chooses to not want to wake up, no one chooses to feel that the way that they do. So it's quite important as to how we say things, to approach things from a place of kindness and non-judgment, in order to provide that person a safe space to be able to say, listen, okay, yeah, you're right, I'm not doing too well. So thank you for touching on that. And I just wanted to ask you again, Leanne, what relationship advice would you give to someone who's dating or is in a relationship or married to someone who has a mental illness? Is it quite the same as what you've given for family members? Because let's say you are with someone that is struggling from depression, for example. How do you best approach that, or any other mental illness, in fact? How do you best approach it, and what advice would you give them?
So I think the first thing, again, educate yourself. The second thing is that if the individual's withdrawing, so the individual's not returning your texts or your phone calls, and you're fully aware, for example, that they suffer from depression, don't take it personally. Don't make it about. Can you find it within yourself to still show up for the person, to still go and knock on their door and actually be present for them? Yes, get support yourself as well, because it may not always necessarily be an easy journey, but at the same time, something connected you to that person, and you've chosen to be with them. At the same time, whether it's family members or it's someone you're in a relationship with or married to, yes, you do need to have boundaries in place of what's okay and what's not. So, for example, if we look at mental illness of addiction, it's not okay, for example, if money is stolen to support a habit. It's okay to invite your dealer over to your house that puts you or your family or your children in that, at risk. So those are just the examples of boundaries in place. Have an agreement in place with the person you're in a relationship with in terms of what can you do to support them, what's okay and what's going to be overstepping the mark. And very often we find that individuals, like in relationships, will, they'll present for therapy and they'll say that their partner has broken up with them because they can't cope with their own mental illness, let alone the demands of a relationship. The person feels that much helpless and they blame themselves because they feel like, well, maybe I wasn't good enough as a partner and therefore that's why I'm being rejected. And I think to have both compassion for yourself but also compassion for the other person in terms of realizing the amount of mental energy it takes to wake up in the morning, let alone having the capacity to engage in a relationship in real life.
But one important thing that you touched on was boundaries as well, because it also goes back to what we were speaking about in the beginning, about self-care and looking out for yourself first, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So if it's taking so much out of you, you actually need to look into yourself and check in with yourself. But then one thing that's important that a lot of people forget is that you also need to set boundaries for yourself in as much as you want to help another person. So we've actually come to the end of our session, but I just wanted to ask both of you, what message do you have for someone, for families, friends or colleagues or husbands or boyfriends or girlfriends who have a loved one that has a mental health illness or issue?
I think from me is there is light somewhere. At the end of the tunnel. Please do get the necessary support for yourself. Self-care is very, very important. Reach out. We have organizations like SADC. There's various support groups that we have across the country. Some of them are online. We also have the telephonic service that you can always reach out to if you need somebody to speak to. So you don't have to go through this alone. There is a big community out there that is willing to assist, and let's just also continue educating ourselves and also creating awareness in our communities about mental health. I think knowledge is power. The more knowledge we have, I always say we always scared of the unknown. Sometimes the stigma is because of fear. It's something that is not within the borders of wherever we're coloring, and if it goes outside, we get scared and we reject it. So let's educate ourselves. The more knowledge you have, the more in control you feel that you are in, and the better you are able to support your loved one while you're taking care of yourself at the same time.
Thank you. And then from Lilian.
I think that at the end of the day, everybody's walking with their own personal struggles. I think especially now, like in the time of COVID, and so whether somebody has a diagnosis or not, I think that like many people are struggling. So don't be afraid to start these crucial and courageous conversations. You don't know what impact you're going to make on somebody's life without even realizing. Reach out to people, whether it's sending a someone saying that you've noticed that they're not okay. Can you support them? Notice the other. I think that we've all become so withdrawn and almost like paranoid in our own bubbles during the last 18 months or so. There's huge power in recognizing the other, whether it's a family member, a friend, acquaintance, a mom at your child's school. And actually saying, what, I know you're not okay, I've been there. How can I help? I think that to walk a journey alone is one thing, but to know there's actually a community of support, as Tembi has spoken about, is huge, and it can be incredibly healing and enlightening.
No, thank you so much, ladies. I feel like we touched both sides in terms of the person that is taking care of the person with a mental health issue and the people that are being taken care of, because I think support from both sides is very, very important. But things that you touched on that I'd like to just recap on is being involved, like being proactive in terms of the help that the person is receiving, but educating yourself about the mental illness or the mental health issue that a person may have, but also setting boundaries, because sometimes we forget that because we don't check in with ourselves, or we don't even take care of ourselves in the name of being a caregiver to someone else. So it's quite important that in as much as you can take care of the next person, you need to take care of yourself too. And thank you so much for touching on that, and also just touching on the fact that, like you're saying, looking out for the other as well. And we're all going through a lot during COVID, so do not downplay your emotions just because you have not been diagnosed with something. If you feel like you're not okay, it's okay to not be okay, but it's also okay to seek help. And just because you're a caregiver doesn't mean that you should feel the guilt of not taking care of yourself because you have to take care of someone else. You also need to take care of yourself. As Leanne said, you can't pour from an empty cup. So thank you so much, ladies, for coming through tonight. Thank you so much to every single person that has been watching Mindful Mondays. I hope that answered a lot of your questions, because I know that I've been receiving a lot of them. So thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Shudu.
Bye.